Welcome, everyone. And on behalf of the Forest Peoples Program, I would like to thank you for making the time to join us today for this webinar on good allyship. My name is Caroline. I'm part of the FPP team. In September last year, 2025, we hosted an event at the New York Climate Week, and some of you may have been there too. And there we first shared and discussed the question, what does good allyship with Indigenous and Forest peoples look like in relation to access to funding and forms of solidarity and support? And we presented a new paper there in which a range of FPP partners shared their perspective on flexible relationship-based funding and support. And we had some good discussions and very insightful contributions from partners from Peru and Indonesia, among others. But we also felt like there were things we didn't manage to properly address because of the time limitations, but also because New York was an in-person event and we only involved a small group of people who happened to be there. So we decided we wanted to organize another event online this time to enable a wider conversation. And when recorded, it can also be used and watched later for anyone who is interested. So today's webinar is really intended and designed as a follow-up to that initial conversation that we had in New York last year. And something we didn't manage to address in New York, we felt, was the question how support organizations and donors can, on the one hand, walk closely enough to be meaningful allies for Indigenous peoples, while on the other hand, not create a dependency or undermine self-determination, even if unintended. So the learning goals for today, therefore, are to give you as participants a better understanding of how good allyship is defined by Indigenous and Forest peoples. And we will do that by hearing from our speakers, who I will introduce in a minute. And we hope to hear from them what good allyship and what that really adds value looks like from their perspective and from their experience. So that brings me to our lineup of distinguished speakers joining us today, and we're very happy that they are here and willing to share their views with us all. So from the Ogiek of Mount Elgin in Kenya, we have Teresa Chimasop. Teresa is the coordinator of the East Africa Indigenous Women-led Assemblies. This is a space where women from 4 countries in East Africa come together to share their experiences on issues related to land rights. And from YMKL in Indonesia, we have Emil Kleden, who spent his long career, including with Pusaka and Aman, on the issue of Indigenous people's rights in Indonesia and on capacity building with Indigenous peoples and local communities in that country. And from the Institute for Legal Defense, or IDL, in Peru, we have Cristina Leon. She is a lawyer and expert in Indigenous peoples, human rights, and international cooperation, and a member of the legal team in the Indigenous Peoples Department at IDL, with a decade of experience in providing technical support to Indigenous peoples. Cristina will be speaking in Spanish today. So thank you so much for being here, Teresa, Emil, and Cristina. And finally, let me introduce today's moderator, who is also the main researcher, interviewer, and the writer behind our allyship report, Joyce Gordillo. Joyce is an independent consultant based in the Philippines, who works at the intersection of documentation and evidence-based policy advocacy, centering the voices of Indigenous peoples in global conversations on rights, climate, and nature. In a minute, I will pass it to her, but let me just briefly sketch out the structure and timings of this session so you know what to expect. So Joyce will start us off with a brief intro presentation to set the context, to offer some reflections about the terms and terminologies used in all of these discussions, and some key findings and messages that we already had in the allyship report. We will then have about 30 minutes for a conversation with Emil, with Teresa, and Christina that Joyce will moderate. And after that, all of you join the conversation. We will lift your questions or comments from the Q&A box or from the chat, and we will read them out and address them to Joyce, Emil, Teresa, or Christina. And then we will have 10 minutes at the end for the wrap up and the closing, where Joyce will offer a recap of the discussion and taking it back to the webinar learning question and hoping we have advanced a bit on that objective. And then finally, there will be some announcements and some next steps, and we expect to close at 3:15 UK time. So without further ado, I will now like to give the floor to Joyce to introduce the Good Allyship piece in some more details to us. Joyce, please.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Just to start off to provide a context on why we're having this conversation. The Valuing Allyship, the publication, started as an internal review for FPP's 4 of its flexible community support models. During the review and the reflections together with the local partners, it also FPP tried to reflect on its own position within the funding ecosystem, and particularly around the growing conversation about channeling funds or direct funding to Indigenous peoples and grassroots organizations, a move that FPP supports. Those reflections also highlighted, the issue of not only how much funds are allocated or received by Indigenous peoples and organizations and local organizations, but also how they are delivered. So the publication, for those who have not accessed it, I can drop the link later in the chat so you can access it, presents 6 stories of FPP's country partners across 5 countries and 3 regions. The stories primarily presented that flexible and trust-based support is not only feasible, but it is also essential to achieve enduring change. And that's from the perspective of enduring change at the grassroots level. That's the perspective from its country partners. The stories revealed also insights, but I'll mention the 4 major ones. Trust is built over years, and trust that's built over years sustains the transformation or the changes that we as a unit for advocating for indigenous rights and land rights are working on. And flexibility in funding fuels responsiveness. What does that mean? Is when partners can act when something unexpected that happens, something that while writing, say, a proposal or a project, is not something that you foresee. Many of this from their experience in the stories, if you read them, are either a weather or a road that's closed because of rain, stalling an activity, and that of course needs rescheduling, or if there is an increased government surveillance and that changes strategies, or if there is a change in government structures or government officials in elections, you would have shifting political opportunities or windows, and that's a different, which you may not have seen it prior to planning a certain initiative. And third is funding, which is related to the second one. Funding follows community priorities and not donor templates. Reframing sustainability. The 4th one is reframing sustainability through shared accountability. Sustainability is not only about financial continuity, but also about building resilient community institutions, nurturing leadership within that, and creating a space for local partners and the community for adaptation over time. Shared accountability would also mean shared not just the success, but also the mistakes and the challenges that local partners or allies FPP has faced, and that in a way is also related to building trust as you share these challenges together, including mistakes and of course the successes. But before I go further, let's quickly discuss on the terms ally and allyship. Ally, as a term, hopes to capture the relationship that is built on trust and less of the transactional relations that's often associated to intermediary as an actor within the context of funding ecosystem. And ally hopefully reaches for something different. Ally is a term that hopes to reach for something that's different. It points to a relationship that is built on trust, shared purpose, and mutual accountability, rather than just a position or rather than just an actor within a funding chain. It also leads us or invites us to what Caroline has mentioned earlier regarding what makes a good ally or the good allyship. And this is what this webinar and also the event in New York that I mentioned is here to explore. And also, as she mentioned earlier, we wanted to sit on, but just to press on that again before I move to introduce our speakers, our FBP's local partners, is one of the questions that we want for us here to reflect on or to sit on today as we listen to to our speakers is how do you walk closely enough to be useful and supportive without creating the very dependency that undermines the self-determination you set out to support? Or if we want to reframe that, under what conditions does external support strengthen what's already there? And when does it substitute for it or quietly redirect it? At this point, I would like to bring in Christina, Emil, and Teresa to hear their points because they live in these questions.
Hi, everyone.
Hola a todos.
Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you. My first question is for Christina. The Quinto y Numa case, and feel free to provide the context about the case, because some of us here or some of our participants joining might not be familiar with the case. So the Quinto y Numa case is a stark reminder that allyship isn't only about funding, but it's also about solidarity that is sustained and a solidarity that is needed in several forms. What has the international support meant for your organization that is working in supporting the family and community mean in pursuit of justice? So that's my first question.
Thank you very much, and welcome to everybody. It is a pleasure to be with you today in topics that are so relevant. As Joyce mentioned, sometimes we don't discuss these things at large, and there are many things to learn from the work as allies we have to take over, and particularly we started to relate and to generate and build trust with the indigenous organizations and with the leaders, indigenous leaders. In the first place, I think that the international support in the case of Quinto, just to give you a little bit of context, because there are many people who may not know the topic of Quinto Numa case. This case of Quinto Numa in Peru is the case, it's one of the most emblematic cases, unfortunately related to a contest of assassination of an indigenous leader, directly related by the failure of a system. It is one of the most emblematic cases because he was a leader who had all the guarantees necessary for protection on the part of the state, but that even that he had to he was murdered on the 25th of November in 2023. And as many defenders, he dedicated his life to looking for the protection of the territories and the communities and the territorial safety in the area that includes his community, which is the Anayaco Quichua in the San Martin jungle in Peru. And in this context, he faced the different threats associated mainly with land ownership and the presence, a clear presence of illegal economies. So based on that context and having all the safety guarantees, the unfortunate reality, the 29th of November of 2023, he was killed. So within this context, accompaniment of the allies and the organizations we considered should be centered in different aspects, taking into account mainly that in what relates to the Quintunoma's case, on the part of the team that was working with them in San Martin and myself, we have we've been accompanying this case and the particular complaints and denouncements that we have filed related to this particular case and also to the illegal economies. What that meant, particularly in this context, there was a series of topics. In the first place, this solidarity is transformed into a compromise to in cases like this one, which could have a very high level of seriousness. And that also talks about particularly about the topic of visibility of a protection. After this particular event, all the accompaniment that was provided to him, the work particularly with the allies, generated a specific solidarity network that reduced considerably the risks that this case could be just filed and be dismissed regarding the assassination or being ignored, as it happens in many of these crimes against indigenous leaders in Latin America and in Peru particularly. Keeping in mind that in Peru, in a context of institutional crisis and social crisis, of a weakening of the institutionality, there is an increase of illegal economies growing in the indigenous territories. And this is a topic that is fundamental. This idea of visibility and protection that generated by all the components, and also with the mandate of different indigenous leaders, have allowed us to translate this into the possibility of avoiding this file to be dismissed, as in many other cases we have seen. Up to this moment, it has not been provided with justice. So I highlight this because there has been so much pressure generated by this particular case that all the people that were responsible, people related to this particular assassination, are in a process to define the responsibilities in this moment. The other topic is this technical support, legal support that has to be consolidated as a joint strategy with the organizations. We have discussed very often this context where we know that the NGOs and civil society organizations and the donors have a specific agendas related to their own work that basically answer to the funds that they administer. And I think that all the organizations are in this line. However, I think that one of the issues that characterize more the relationship, the generation of trust amongst indigenous leaders and the organizations is precisely the possibility of consolidating agendas that are decided together. This is a topic that from the very beginning, particularly, has determined that kind of work that we have been developing in the case of the Santa Lucia community in San Martin. So this accompaniment has been there for a long time, but and we have been able to generate like common and joint agents that have also been adapted to the needs and context of the indigenous people. This is not something that is so easy when we try to respond to those projects that are being financed by donors that have very clear items and that particularly generate those risks, and sometimes they are not so flexible the needs that we need to address in those cases and alliances. So that's why in this particular case, it is very complex to determine a roadmap to really deal with these kinds of cases. There has to be a specific collaboration, a roadmap and strategies that are going to be dealt with each one of the peoples and each one of the cases in a very particular manner. So in this case, what we have been doing with this community from the very beginning, we managed to define these joint agendas, and even though the context was very complex, we managed to construct not only the case for the justice and the courts, which is something that families now are seeking to do, but also for the accompaniment of the community and the family and the leaders so in the context like this, it is something that is very challenging because we are talking about the people who were killed. So this has generated a huge impact. The topic of relating this with other needs beyond what the projects can address, particularly depending on the criteria that we have mentioned. And also, there is a very specific topic about dignity and memory. I think that we can say that in the case of Kinte Numa, I feel that based on my experience from our accompaniment with the team that has dealt with this particular case of the community, is the topic of the recognition, the global recognition of the Quinto Inuma's legacy. The idea or the topic of for the community is not to surrender. So the message is maintained and now is alive in those who are taking on the leadership, like his brother Emmanuel Inuma, who is the new Apo or the new boss of the community, chief of the community, sorry. And they have decided that they are not going to be remain quiet and they're going to continue fighting until the end. And we say the end, we are not talking about only justice regarding the killing, but also the context behind this that was associated with the reasons why this happened. And so there are many things that I will address maybe in other questions because there are many other complementary topics that we will have to deal with for the work to help yield results.
Thank you very much for that, for also giving us a picture from what was needed or what has been done. But just to like narrow that down or summarize, like name 3 things that 3 or more, but like 3 is good. In a case, in this case or in that experience, since 2023, since the case started, or when it happened, like what allies must be willing to do or to risk to be genuinely supportive? Or if we rephrase that, what could allies have done that they did not or could not, at least for and you can be very honest about this, like allies in general or FPP in particular, you can share your experience. Sorry, I remind you, I think to speak.
Thank you. Sorry. Perfecto. Well, this is a difficult question, difficult to answer, but I'm going to try to do it with the most sincerity and honesty. The topic of human rights defenders or indigenous human rights defenders it has an interest of the NGO or the organizations that dedicate to the topics dedicated to environment defenders and the care of the environment, all the topics related to this. So let's say that during the accompanying of this case, there was a lot of support to the case to make it visible. And not only for us, not only us, we have not limited to sustainably accompanying the communities that allowed us to document the whole context and this difficult context of the threats and the land battle. But there were other organizations that in that context and before the assassination, they were present to make it visible, make this case visible. And the case visibility, I don't know if this was to justify the funds, the financing, the funding. This generated a difficult context of exposure to the indigenous peoples. This is an exposure that goes beyond protection, safety, and this should be the line through which we should start from that. There have been some organizations from NGOs, civil society, and donors that they have given a lot of visibility to the case, so that they have put the indigenous people at risk. And I'm being honest and sincere, in an irresponsible fashion. Because after the event in 2023, these organizations that generated this context, in the end, they have been given some sustainable accompanying. So the case of the defender, it has only, they respond when they are doing their projects and visibility, but not when there are consequences. They accompany, but not the consequences. So the concrete case of the later assassination, the necessary flexibility when we assume this confidence or this trust with the leaders and the organization that is related to the challenges of this context, so that we can meet the needs. We needed many topics, and the organization that accompanied the case, also they accompanied the psychological, provided a psychological accompaniment. And it was very weakened because it had to be supported by many things, by the work we were doing. Because you understand that this assassination, it was in front of his wife, his brothers, his son. They were there at the moment when he was assassinated, because they were there. They were taking a bath in the creek. So I think that there was a lot of absence of these groups in the case of the Quinto case. So the other question you made is that what the ally is willing to do to accompany and concretely to these cases, the sustainable accompaniment or the support. This is fundamental, and this is one of the main problems that most of them do not be responsible for. So we have begun this support, and right now we are looking for justice and healing. Yeah. So for this area of the community. So So we are only us doing the work. So this is something, this is a concrete message that everything is documented about the support received while the leader was in this context of this struggle or this battle. So there was no measure of self-protection for overexposure. We have some reflections, some thoughts about that regarding the defenders of human rights defenders. We think that a lot of the standard of in favor of the defender of the human rights is not realistic when we talk about the indigenous defenders and the territorial or land struggles. Even in Peru, the regulation doesn't talk about the defenders. They talk about the indigenous defender. So this exposes indigenous persons too much.
Thank you very much for that honesty. And I think that's one of the things that we wanted to bring up and have that discussion here and have everyone here. That there should be shared consequences as well. I think that covers what mutual accountability and having that understanding of sharing the risks, which might, and the risk would largely be tilting on the communities just because they live in that space, and that space is where it's not safe. So yeah, thank you very much for that. I'd like to bring in Emil and Teresa. Have there been any experiences in your country or within your organization where the support was well intended, but but somehow did not end up not as what you have expected, or eventually not being helpful? Emil?
Thank you, Joyce. I would like to start with your word in the beginning of the session that you said that we are not only supporting each other, but also share not only success, but also mistakes. That really makes me happy because it reminds me of my mistakes along the way. And I think that is from my own experience, that is what I understand about allyship. When I did any mistakes, and what makes it serious that I am representing my institutions. But in allyship, our ally not punish me, but help me to get to the right one. It's really different with, I was once work in industry around almost 9 years. So if I compare these two situations, in industry, I will get really hard punishment with repeated mistakes. So that makes a difference between allyship in our talking now with my experience when I was working in industry. So supporting each other, it also means that showing the right thing when we did mistakes. Regarding your questions, what is the most problematic for myself? This is quite subjective, but from my own experience, is the concept when we apply the concept of self-determination. That's really problematic for me. In our work in allyship, we promote free prior informed consent. And it means that the community that we work with have the right that we do not intervene to make decision what option they will take. Even if we already discussed with them various options, at least to minimize the situation that they experience in terms of injustice. But then they have their own right to make choice. And sometimes this is not what we expect to happen. So that's really challenging in our work. Our community we work with in Sumatra, Kalimantan, North Moluccas, and in Papua, they have made their own choice to work on agroecology, for example, or they choose agrarian reform for their lands. It means that individual title, or they choose customary forest, or even they choose village forest that under state control. But after that, they ask us, what next? And we can give them a good answer, or to make a promise. We cannot do that. So that's really challenging when I work, for example, with FPP in promoting FPIC. So we respect their rights to make decisions on their own rights, but the problem is that they know the problem they are facing is because, for example, they lose their land because it has been taken by state, by company, backed by state legislation, and they want the land back. So we discuss with them some options, not only in terms of domestic option, but also international and market option. But then they choose one option that we never expect. So that's like our work strikes back. So that's really challenging for us. That's I'm talking about our allyship with community. In terms of our allyship with civil society organizations, not only with FPP, but also with others, sharing common concern and commitment, that is really a long process. Long process. I remember in 2010, I had a discussion with Marcus in England. The question is, what can we do, or do we still have responsibility to community we work with after the project ends? So in terms of relation with donors, we have allyship, and we got the support from certain donors, but that's a time-bound project. But years after years, we work with community, they expect that we can stand with them, not only for 3 years, for example, but the project is only for 3 years. So what I can refer to my experience with FEP and also with others, the building trust is what we can do, even if we can still communicate and help in one and another way with communities, even if the project already ended. And this can only be done if we develop our relationship with local chapter of national organizations or local NGOs or local actors that we already built relationship during the previous years when we did the project. So allyship for me is a process that has a time consequence. That's the first. The second is that a process of building trust and developing the trust among more and more member of ally, I mean. So we may start a certain work, and we always, that's also my concern, that we always work with or about injustice. Yeah. So people talk about injustice, not only in economic development, but many things they talk about injustice. But what we can do is to minimize the impact. We can promise them justice. We cannot. So I think the terminology during the allyship can reflect that we talk about expectation, what people expect to get next year and next year or in 3 years ahead. So we can only talk about expectation, but people really hope about taking justice. In reality, taking back their lands. But from domestic legal system, that's really difficult.
How did you manage thank you for like a longer discussion and for seeing my questions. How did you manage the community's expectations of a continued support?
Sorry, I can hear you because the translation
Interpretation.
is louder than.
I'll mention again. Initially, thank you for jumping on to the wider discussion that I wanted to ask you. But like, how did you manage the community expectation? You mentioned earlier the experience, like they keep expecting the support even after the project, but then that's part of building trust, where you keep working despite the project ending. But how did you manage to or how did you relay that information, and how did you manage the community's expectation because of the changes that's happening within you as someone who's supporting the community?
Yeah, that's what we face as a challenge in our work, years after years. So we always communicate intensively with community, not only by device like a phone, but we come regularly. And having discussion with community, I mean through community meeting, and we also have community organizers that live with community, that bridging the informations and the assistance that we could provide. But we always talk honestly with community. So that's the way we work. We never, or we try to avoid as strong as we can to be trapped in manipulating informations. So we talk honestly about the challenge of regulations, about the policy, about the information that we got from our ally about international development, about the progress in human rights discourse, or the way some our friends in somewhere that they already success with some ways to address indigenous problem with lands. So we provide the exemplars stories from others. Also, sharing experience with other communities, with other organizations. So we did this for years, yeah, but it's still the challenge that, because community is not only talk with us.
Yeah.
Company have persons that can come every day to community. The government's apparatus can come every day, but we cannot come every day. So we tried it. What the best way we can do is we put our community organizers living with them, and we held regular discussions with them. We provide them with informations. Yeah. We provide training for capacity building. We provide them with legal steps. This is in the last few years, we work with FEP on strategic litigations, for example. So all this we try to provide to communities and make to keep their hope still. Yeah,
I
so
think,
that's the way we can manage so far. So I
and I
can
think
tell
you've
you
explained
anything
it
more.
well. And I think you've explained it well. I think this is also a question that um, doesn't necessarily have a straightforward answer, and you definitely explained how the complexities of it, and that's one of the things that allies should be prepared to also face and understand with the community. And I think what's important points that you mentioned about staying with them and providing them different activities and keeping their hope, ensuring keeping their hope alive, and ensuring, because also in my experience, ensuring that they know that they are not struggling by themselves, that there are people who knows and cares about their situation. And I think it's also important that you shared, to ensure that the connecting them to other communities as part of solidarity, and knowing, again, like, and knowing that there are people who supports them, and there are also others that they can support by having an understanding that the struggles, because the issue is normally, you mentioned about justice, and injustices are always present. Justice is always something that we struggle for, that we demand for. It's an ongoing, and it's an
Sorry,
ongoing.
I mean, I just explained the words that people always say.
The words are, yeah.
Yeah, that's not my word. From my own thinking, but
That's what the community
yeah,
say. You
that's
mean,
the
right?
word
Yeah.
they always say.
Yeah.
Yeah. And another thing I think that is important, that it's not only about the solidarity that people need. They need
Yeah.
technical assistance
Yeah.
in terms of producing something in agriculture, in helping them to respond to a threat. Yeah. For example, we talk about it. That might be too difficult to talk about climate change to community, but the impact, they ask about what we can do in practice to address the issue that they experience directly. Yeah? Drought, flu, etc. So they need technical assistance. I think that's the other thing that important to work with community in our allyship.
Yeah, definitely, because different kind of supports is needed. Due to constriction of time, like I'll move on. Thank you very much, Emil. Like I think there are questions for you later, and we'll ask you to come back. I'll just move on very quickly to Teresa. Teresa, the women's assemblies are a powerful example of community-led organizing that allies must learn to follow rather than lead. That is my perspective, and I think that's what we presented in the report. How do you think have assemblies shape what the community asks of its allies? And from a lens of gender justice, like have you seen allyship, even when well-intentioned? I think that's related to what Christina and Emias mentioned. Even when well-intentioned, reinforces or challenges existing power dynamics within the community. You're on mute.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Joyce. And of course, just speaking on behalf of the assemblies and talking of good allyship, and from what you had mentioned earlier is, of course, allyship is always built on trust. And where there is trust, I can say there is transparency. And picking from transparency means, again, there is consistency on how things are done. And that's how we've been working with our allies. And for this case, because I've known FPP for quite some time, now it's over 10, 14 years or so, I can speak from that experience. And that is why we are still working with FPP. So talking of allyship, it's always built on trust. And of course, talking of how there is shared responsibility and accountability, I can say for sure sometimes I think FPP have also been subjected to a position where they need to justify why they are supporting the community. And we have also been found in that position where we have to, say why FPP is supporting the community. So there's like push and pull from outside forces sometimes, and FPP has been subjected to that, and notwithstanding the online bullying. So yes, and just to talk of again recognizing and accepting accountability is assembly was built, or rather was born as a space to give women, a space created to enable women come together, to fight for their land rights, human rights, environmental dignity, about their culture, and about their economic empowerment. So when this space came in, it's a space that to me, I feel it was born due to good allyship. And I attribute every other success from this assembly that is led by women because of good allyship that was born from good allyship, the space rather. So yes, I can acknowledge from where I sit is FPP has worked with us for so many years, and not so long ago that I think they also thought that women have been playing a vital role in the community. But then again, I think that recognizing the efforts was not coming out as it should be, was not coming out as they were doing. The efforts were there, but no one was actually recognizing it. So I can say this is a space that was intentionally created to bring women together, talk of, so that they can strengthen their role in defending what is rightfully theirs, and of course trying to resist some of the violations and that are actually happening to them and their community. So, and I can say probably this is not just a space for dialogue. Indigenous women-led assemblies is a space for healing as well. It's a space for learning. It's a space for building solidarity, and it's a space for taking a collective action. So, of course, it's a unique space, I can say, because our assemblies, as it is organized by women, coordinated by women. Programs are planned, discussions are planned by women, and the host is decided by women. Not that allies are not playing a role, but allies, we treat them as people who just come in to support where we need or where we request. And so since women now have been given an opportunity to plan and coordinate their convenings, we call this is a unique space because, again, assemblies do not happen just anywhere. It happens right at the community level and in a rotational manner, so that this time we are in this community and next time we are in this on the other community, simply because we believe it is right at the community level that there is the deepest understanding of the community issues. When community come together, they will actually have the first-hand information, learn about the struggles of the host communities, learn about cultures, learn about histories, and of course, just have the environmental, realities of the host community. And there's a way we've been doing our assemblies so that we have a pre-assembly meeting that happens again right at the community, but it's still coordinated by women. Don't forget, the allies are still supporting, but they are not, taking the space, so that the discussions that are coming to the assemblies are actually brought from the pre-assembly meetings that happen in the communities. So we do this way to give the communities, the opportunity, the chance. It is the community that understands their needs better. It is not the allies to say, this is what you need to bring to the assembly. It is not the allies to say, this, probably this is just an example, that these funds are meant for these discussions. No, it is actually purely women who decide what they want to talk about. And discussions about assemblies are not fixed. They are very flexible, so that it evolves, according to the needs emerging from the discussions. And I can say it is actually giving us, the movement itself is an autonomous, movement. So, and community-led allies, the allies are just invited to support and accompany us and respond to our needs where if we will request anything of the sort. So that is why the assemblies have really shaped the clear understanding of what allies must learn, from us rather than lead. And just talking of, again, how assemblies have transformed communities. From the past, I can say communities, not only the assemblies, have been very dependent on, heavily, I can say, dependent on the external, organizations for direction, for mobilization, for probably even decision making. And these are decisions that affect us, but then again, we want to rely on the allies to make decisions. But that one is different for the assemblies. Allies do not make decisions for us. It's us who make decisions and request allies to support. So yes, through assemblies, communities have actually, gained what I can say it is the greater confidence, on how they can organize themselves. And when I say communities, in this perspective, I'm talking of women. Assemblies is a space for women that men just come to support. And yes, so we've been able to do, right now we are able to build solidarity. I think we've done that through the assembly. We build solidarity across, other regions, talking of just how to organize convenings, mobilize resources, as opposed to when we would just wait for the allies to do that. Not that we are not still, not that allies are not still supporting, but through these convenings, we are able to learn, share, and now resource, fund source for our convenience. So that allies, when allies come, it's like they are also supporting what we are doing. So yes, it has built us as a community, and it has built us as a woman, movement. So that right now, communities, are able to participate and make their decisions, enable Indigenous people connect, build solidarity, and so forth. And yeah, quite a number of solidarities that we've done with other movements in urban centers. Because when I talk of Indigenous women-led assemblies, this is assemblies that has brought women from pastoral communities and forest people communities. But due to, how after engaging other movements and building solidarity, because that is another objective for creating this space, is we've been able to build solidarity with other movements, from the urban areas, because we actually have challenges that bring the rural and the urban centers together. So every other success, I can actually say we attribute it to good allyship, because we cannot only say allyship, is through funding, and talking of indigenous movements coming together with the urban movements and trying to build grassroots resistance and all the spaces across the country. So as a result, communities now ask allies not just to speak on their behalf, but just to support community-led processes. Can you support community-led processes so that, and of course, respect the autonomy again? And as I had said earlier, it's actually right at the community, right at the grassroots level, that community or women understand the issues, and you will get actually the deeper understanding of the community. So if you're able to support these community-led processes, I think there's a better, allyship that is developed, rather than if you were to lead and something happens and the allyship, probably if it was about funding and it ends, I think the community is left in a very awkward position. So yes,
I think
we
you
actually,
put us
yeah,
down. Sorry.
yeah,
I think you pointed out very kind of summarizing what has discussed earlier on regarding ensuring that allies do not they do not lead but follow what the community has already built, and also recognizing the strength of the communities that already exists, and they are there to hold and ensure that this strength is what leads where the conversation is going or where activities are going. I think it's the same situation when Emil said earlier regarding despite not agreeing to what the community has decided, but listening to their voice and trusting their decision is part of it. I'm really sorry because we're pressed on time. If you have last one sentence that if an ally gets it right, whether this is an experience with FPP or other allies, what does it look like? One sentence.
Sorry, Joyce, I missed that.
What is when an ally gets it right? Expanding your experience with FPP. What does it look like? What does it look like when an ally gets it right, gets the support right? One sentence.
Okay.
Help me wrap up the whole our part.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That is a bit, you're confining me in a place where maybe I may not be able to say what when allies gets it right, then it means from our end, our objectives, of course, will be fulfilled when they get it right. So yeah, but if I was to explain further, maybe it would make a lot of sense.
We give you a chance to explain further and have it on the follow-up report. But thank you very much, Emil and Christina, for your time. I'll pass it on to Caroline.
Okay, thanks very much. And that was such a rich discussion. We have been monitoring the chat and the Q&A box. And what we saw is that there were not specific questions for Christina, Teresa, or Emil in terms of clarifications of your contributions. So I think that was all very clear. I did see a lot of affirmative comments and encouragement that people were mostly in agreement with what was brought forward and summarized by Joyce as well. Well, clearly we, as happens often, we don't have really the time to have a full Q&A conversation with you because we have to wrap up in a couple of minutes. But what I saw in a lot of the questions was this issue of how do we deal with financial capture and NGOs taking the policy spaces of Indigenous people. So a lot of questions and comments were about how do we deal with allies, NGOs who are presenting themselves as allies, but they are capturing the money that is intended to go to the grassroots level, to the Indigenous organizations, and NGOs who are taking the policy spaces where the Indigenous Forest Peoples organizations should be speaking. What I suggest is that because we do plan to share a post-webinar blog, like a recap piece with you all, including the recording of this webinar with you, and we'll attempt to address any unanswered questions or respond to comments that you put in the Q&A and in the chat. So you will receive an email that also takes the conversation a bit further in due course, if that's agreeable to all. I'm looking at you, Joyce. Did you want to share any concluding comments?
Maybe not to answer that question, or this conversation would be longer.
Yes, we'll have to do that another time, but maybe just to take us back to the webinar question and whether you think we've made a bit of progress.
I think the insight that we have in the report again reflects the experience and the discussion that we had with Teresa, Emil, and Christina. But I wanted to also like really I think the reason why we have the title of this event is Walking Together, because you want that trust, and the trust that is built over time, and that's sometimes a result of sharing the risks, sharing the consequences, and understanding the risks that the people that you are supporting um, and the brunt of the risk and the challenges is often left to the communities or the human rights defenders or the family of the human rights defenders that have lost lives. And I think that's one of the things that to ensure that you build that trust. And if there are mistakes, like Emil has mentioned, he's reflecting on it, and it's different to it's hard to come to terms to that, but to have that to recognize the accountability, which was also mentioned by Christina. I think those are the things that we can add in the report or in our reflections when doing this. And I hope the conversation that might not have captured the sharing that was shared by all the speakers, but I hope that we get more reactions to this when we release the blog, or I think we can still reach out to any one of us here for any specific questions that we'd have, and have the speakers be involved in drafting the blog, and have their thoughts still included in that piece. So that's pretty much what I can say as a not so much as a concluding remarks, because I have my notes is quite long, and discussing them again in nature in its substance might take much longer than we need.
Okay, thanks a lot, Joyce. I think it's time to close. Before we sign off, I wanted to again thank our speakers of today, Joyce, Emil, Christina, and Teresa, for offering your time and your very interesting views and your experiences. I would also like to say thank you to our interpreters, Ricardo and Mauricio, and to the FPP support team for the logistical support of this webinar. And finally, thanks to all of you who have joined us today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something, and definitely we need to take this conversation further. In terms of next steps, as I said, we do plan to share a recap email with you in due course, which also has the recording. Then we will try to address, the questions that were raised in the chat a bit further. And as the last point, a heads up that we are working on the next report in this series, taking allyship further to look at it in the context more of capacity building and organizational resilience and development. Joyce is again working on this with us, and we'll be launching a report sometime after the summer, so do look out for that. So that was all from our side. We may see some of you at London Climate Action Week, maybe next week, and otherwise we hope to see you next time. So thank you all again. Have a nice rest of your day, and goodbye.